Hello and welcome to the debate. I'm your host, Maqbool, with you at PTV World. In today's show, we're going to be taking a look at Pakistan's climate change issues and, of course, the impact with regards to Pakistan being one of the countries that is prone to climate-induced disasters. And this, of course, most recently visible as part of the 2022 floods that we experienced. In the aftermath of which, Pakistan put forward the stance of climate financing and climate justice, which was something that Pakistan championed and, of course, talked about on international platforms, including, of course, COPs in the United Nations. With regards to how this is very, very necessary for countries like Pakistan. And while a lot of these commitments have been made, we haven't really seen that translating into any sort of particular help in terms of cash inflow in Pakistan and other countries. But we have a good news coming in from the IMF front with a $1.3 billion package being approved by the IMF with regards to their relief and sustainability facility, under which, of course, Pakistan will be able to get access to this climate fund. But what exactly will be the modalities of it and how this will impact the inflow of the money into Pakistan and then, of course, its utilization for climate initiatives is something that remains to be seen. And this, of course, is also very welcome news along with the SLA that has been achieved with the IMF. But now I want your, of course, perspective in terms of developing towards what really is the focus right now. And that's what we're going to be talking most about in the show with reference to what the impact has been so far and what sort of work also needs to be done, particularly in terms of data gathering and, of course, making sure that the ways that we have calculated our needs and assessed what has been going on in the aftermath of 2022 and other such catastrophes can be dealt with, and then, of course, be prepared for any future disasters as well. So that's going to be our focus in the segment today, where we're going to explore the very important and integral aspect of this issue in Pakistan and how this particular support coming in from the IMF can actually help us move forward. For this and more, as always, in the studios, I've been joined by senior analyst Farrukh Pitafi and Faisal. We've also been joined online by our guest, Professor Saleem Ali, who's an environmentalist and joined us online. Thank you very much, Saleem, for joining us and being a part of the discussion. And I'm going to start with you because I want your understanding in terms of how we are actually looking at this particular news coming in from the IMF and as part of its relief and sustainability facility as to what sort of help will this number actually make in terms of what Pakistan needs, and how do you see that actually translating into this money coming in and then being utilized appropriately for these issues?
Yes, well, I think overall it's a positive step that they are linking some of the larger financial restructuring arrangements also to more sustainable outcomes for the country's economy. Historically, the IMF has not been as engaged on issues of environmental sustainability as other financial institutions like the International Finance Corporation, as well as the development banks. So that's refreshing. Of course, a lot of it will be in terms of how the government of Pakistan decides to implement these kinds of approaches. I think increasingly there's consensus that we have to move more towards adaptation efforts as the impact of climate change is now quite pronounced, especially with reference to flooding. So that should be the priority. Unfortunately, with some of the CPEC projects, a lot of the emphasis was on rapid infrastructure delivery without looking at some of these issues, and so this may also try to balance out some of those impacts. China has also indicated that they're going to try and green CPEC. They've been saying so for the past few years. So let's see where things go.
Right. With regards to when we talk about the ways in which we're going to put forward this stance, there is also a lot of discussion around whether or not a proper needs assessment has been made. Of course, after particularly the 2022 floods, we saw that Pakistan really did put forward the stance, had an estimate on the kind of money that was required also in terms of recovery and rehabilitation. But have we made an overall assessment in terms of Pakistan and its needs nationally with reference to potential catastrophes that can possibly exist? And do we even have those data collection points and sources in order to truly analyze what the current situation and needs are?
Yes, well, usually these kinds of estimates are made by the insurance industry. And because Pakistan does not have a mature insurance sector, a lot of the estimates are wild guesses, to be honest. There's not much systematic analysis that goes into them. And so,
Ministry. Can they not?
The
Can they
climate
not contribute in
ministry,
this?
they don't have the resources to do detailed damage assessments and scenarios. These kinds of analyses require both climate modeling, hydrological modeling, as well as financial analysis. And so it's quite a complicated process. That's why I think one of the things Pakistan should do is enhance its insurance sector, because the insurance sector is where these kinds of efforts can be really much more useful. Unfortunately, Pakistan's insurance sector has focused on life insurance policies rather than property insurance and these kinds of issues. So that's what I think the government should prioritize.
Right. Faisal, I want your take on this as well, particularly in terms of the efforts that have been made as part of the infrastructure that we do presently have, and what can be done in order to strengthen that and mobilize the resources that are at hand. While, of course, this is a great win and it's being celebrated, there is a lot of work that needs to be done at home and measures that can be taken to mitigate the risks.
Yes, and obviously, but I was listening to Dr. Saleem, and I would fully agree with him that when it comes to making the estimates, of course, it's just the rough sort of amounts they are coming up with. And why I say this, because I have a personal experience of visiting both Balochistan and Sindh province when it was the flood situation out there. Both of the floods, they were quite different to each other. In Balochistan, it was the flash flooding. Of course, people had an outcry of losing their livestock and, of course, their belongings. And when it comes to deep into the interior Sindh, of course, they had everything to do with the static flooding. Of course, water was static out there, and their crops and their livelihoods, they were affected by it, and then their homes as well, they were destroyed. To me, I think on the ground, I mean, both of the provinces, what I experienced was that Pakistan military, Pakistan army was everywhere, and of course they were the best people who even were having the logbooks of what they have done so far and what sort of information they are getting. Especially, there were certain places within Balochistan where there were a bit of cliffs and hilly areas, and in them hilly areas, even they knew at that time that somebody has just come from a village that is based on top of that mountain, and they were telling that this much of the havoc has been created out there. And so they had a logbook, and they were obviously well aware of whatever was going around them. And with them, of course, assistant commissioners and deputy commissioners. When it comes to local governments out there, when it comes to the administrative setup out there, they are the best people to, of course, have all of that mechanism in which they can make an assessment. I'm not saying that that would be 100% truth, but of course it can be near to the truth. Reason being, they are the ones who are directly in touch with the people on the ground. So to me, I think when we talk about, especially, I mean, in recent days, we have been highlighting this aspect that when the estimates were made of the loss Pakistan made, it was around $32 billion. But the pledges which were made to Pakistan, they were little more than $10 billion, and out of which, when Pakistan was asked to sort of give the plans where this money would be spent, and Pakistan ended up only giving around $2.5 billion worth of projects and plans. And when it comes to rest of the money, that money is there for Pakistan. But of course, when it comes to doing research or proper research on the basis of big data, as you have earlier mentioned by your yourself, you mentioned on the basis of the losses which were counted for. I think that's how it could be done more professionally. And in terms of where to get this whole information from, and who needs to get involved with the planning commission, I think the local government and the administrative setup out there in every district, they need to be, of course, intact with the planning commission, so that when next time we are going with the projects, with the plans, then we have adequate data, then we have adequate data on the losses which were people were bearing. And to me, Sana, if I if I highlight when I was in Balochistan, everyone highlighted one aspect, and that was losing their livelihood. And their livelihood was what? It was of course livestock. I mean, people had buffaloes or cows or goats, and they were totally relying on that livelihood, and that livelihood wasn't there anymore for them. So this loss and whatever in terms of coming days they have been bearing in terms of a cost just because of the loss, I think that needs to be accounted for as well. And overall, I think assistant commissioners and deputy commissioners, and at that time, whichever the units of the Pakistan military they were involved in that time, I think they can play a pivotal role when it comes to highlighting and enlightening the planning commission.
Right. And Farrukh, I want your take on this as well, because while we have these different sectors and of course infrastructures in place, and we are of course looking forward for this external help coming in terms of financing, do we have that sense of direction in terms of where we're taking this as to our fight against climate change in general, given the fact that so much of that also has global impact that is perhaps beyond Pakistan's control, more or less? We can of course talk about advocacy and other platforms where we can speak more on this, but in terms of what Pakistan has to deal with, irrespective of the local measures it can take, how much of that is being catered for or factored in these discussions, and of course the local measures that we can take, for example constructions near the banks that and other such measures that can be taken, how much of that is really being focused on?
Thank you very much, Sana, for the question. I think with somebody as accomplished as Dr. Saleem being on our panel, I will try not to hog his airtime, and I will try to be succinct as possible. But there are 2 or 3 things which are very intriguing. Earlier, Dr. Saab was actually talking about flooding that keeps on happening in the country. That is not all. We are vulnerable in every aspect possible, right? This year there was less rain, and because of that 3 provinces of the country are facing drought-like situation. With that kind of a situation, you have to actually worry about your water channels, you have to worry about conservation as well, and how do you manage everything. Unfortunately, our infrastructure had two waves. One was of course the colonial infrastructure that we had, and then we had whatever Ayub Khan accomplished. After that, we keep on starting projects and they hardly actually fit in the picture. We have this terrible habit of leaving things halfway through. Remember, there was a time when your Supreme Court Chief Justice wanted to build 2 dams in the country. I don't know what became of that dam, because I know the dam fund is still in the Supreme Court's accounts. So with that kind of a situation, one has to look at the bigger picture. Unfortunately, because your question was about sense of direction. My humble submission is, because we have 3 layers of government, because of that, there are too many directions. Local government might not have that kind of bandwidth to plan ahead. Similarly, when it comes to provincial governments, they have their own vision, and then you have center. And unfortunately, the center does not, our EPA does not seem to have that kind of vision as well. Data is very important. Earlier, he was talking about data, right? So I was reminded of a beautiful book by Rukmani S., Whole Numbers and Half Truths, what data tells you about modern India. It is about India. But, given that both of us actually inhabited similar kind of post-colonial structures, administrative structures, because of that, you are astounded reading this book, how many ledgers there are. Even health ministry, even education ministry has so much data, because we don't have any central system to collate all this data and to put it into action. Because of that, we have created the silos where numbers go to die. Unfortunately, we haven't known the value of that. Had we known it, because without numbers, without data, you cannot, Sana, have the kind of planning that is needed. And then, of course, everything is going to be extrapolation, and extrapolation usually leads to generalizations. In the end, you don't accomplish
Right.
much. I hope that in coming days, people like Dr. Ali are listened to and their advice is taken so that we have better direction for the country.
Absolutely. And Dr. Saleem, I want your take on this discussion as well, but add to that in terms of how much of these efforts should also be directed in terms of how the community in general is responding to these climate initiatives and how it's actively taking part in it, while also, of course, taking a look at the global trends, because there seems to be a lot of the platforms such as COP and others available where people are raising their voices, but even those platforms are being criticized for not being climate friendly and being actually anti-climate in a lot of ways, considering how the Amazon forest is being used up, for example, with the COP coming up in Brazil. But I want your take in terms of what that means as to how much value can be offered when we talk about Pakistan putting up a front in these discussions.
Yes, so I think, to have resilience, you need a convergence of both grassroots and governmental approaches, and you cannot neglect one at the behest of the other. Within Pakistan, we do have traditional ecological knowledge of communities who have lived with flooding over years, and they've had, good experience with traditional architecture, for example, which would make them more resilient. We need to make sure that this kind of cultural change that is happening from the urban elite does not undermine those kinds of traditional ecological approaches. And we have some very talented landscape architects. I was at Beacon House National University a few months ago and was very impressed by some of those projects that the students are working on with flood resilient communities and how they can work with both modern and traditional approaches. So that's all very important. Then on the governmental side, of course, you have zoning criteria. We shouldn't be allowing for certain kinds of building infrastructure in highly risk prone areas. So you need both. You need the zoning, you need the traditional techniques, and through such a convergent approach, I think we can be a much more resilient country in terms of climate change. So I remain hopeful. I think we have to be conscious that whenever there's climate finance, there is this kind of honeypot problem. People see this as a resource for corrupt individuals to come and try and make a quick dime. And we have to make sure that there is good accountability and vigilance over climate finance, because that in itself then can be a cause for cynicism among the public.
Right. Dr. Saab, given that you actually brought up zoning, I wanted you to actually tell us, because recently we have seen reports about pollution in big cities in the country, and there is the issue of urban sprawl. Do you think that the crisis has reached a point where authorities are taking serious steps, or our zoning laws and our urban sprawl issues are still not handled properly?
Yes, I think there's a lot of variety in terms of Pakistan's zoning implementation. I mean, in Islamabad, the city was designed by the great Greek urban planner Konstantinos Doxiadis, who was considered one of the fathers of ecological planning, and he considered it his masterpiece. And so the CDA was supposed to play a very effective role in zoning, and it has done to a large degree. We have less the case in other parts of the country. Certainly in Karachi and Lahore is a very different dynamic in terms of the local authorities. Um, so we need to be conscious of what happens with certain kinds of these, massive real estate developments, which do not often follow or they circumvent established practice. But we have the resources, we have by resources, I mean the human capital, the intellectual capital in terms of architecture and planning. Pakistan has that. We have a history of having a very well planned city. Even, there are people who criticize Islamabad, but as someone who has a PhD in environmental planning, I can say Islamabad is, in many ways, it is one of the best planned capitals. If you compare it to capitals like Brasilia or other planned capitals, or Canberra in Australia, or Abuja in Nigeria, it is actually a very well planned capital. So let's see if we can make the most of that.
Right. And Dr. Saleem, with regards to when we talk about how the ways in which climate action is being looked at internationally also as a necessary fight, as a priority, do we see that coming in or changing in terms of how this is being looked at as a primary interest of countries such as the US, for example, now with the new presidency also in place?
Yes, I mean, I think with reference to the US, we just need 4 years of, it's going to be a complete hiatus on climate related activity. So we should just forget about anything with reference. And as someone who's sitting here in the US, it is quite lamentable that this has come to pass. But uh, US aid has essentially been demolished for all practical purposes. And the US participation in climate negotiations, or even any kind of climate related activity, is gone now because of the withdrawal again from the Paris Agreement. The question is now, how much will other countries come and take on the mantle of where the US has left? Because, especially with reference to US aid, and as far as the climate change treaty negotiation, in any case, the US was not doing that much. But with reference to the US aid programs, many of which were very much supportive of climate adaptation and others, that's where I think we have to see whether the Gulf countries will take on a bigger share. Um, we should be relying much more on and asking some of our Gulf brethren to support climate adaptation in areas which we will be deficient now with other resources. And then the other question is also the role of the private sector. How much are they going to see an opportunity for using the climate finance to actually develop more sustainable projects? And that remains to be seen. One of the projects to watch is the Ravi Urban Development Authority, the RUDA project, which is now going to be the world's largest riparian development if it actually reaches its full phases. And that's an area I'm quite interested in now further doing some research on. Right now there are many serious concerns with that. There have been cases filed in court by various nonprofits, but it can be done sustainably. I mean, it would be nice to see the Ravi rehabilitated. There are plans to build wastewater treatment plants. That would be very positive if they actually do it and they improve health and sanitation outcomes. So there are some encouraging efforts, but we need to be vigilant across the board.
Dr. Saleem, if we talk about winters, I remember during the winters we have been doing many shows related to smog.
Yes.
Two big cities, one in Pakistan, of course Lahore, I'm talking about, and the other one in India, New Delhi. Both of them, they were
Yes.
worst hit. And when it comes to our uh, atmosphere is something we can't create borders within. And when it comes to whatever the economic activity is taking place inside India, that can affect Pakistan. And then same vice versa. Of course, Pakistan's economic activity can affect them as well. So knowing the facts about both of the countries, they have the bone of contention, they are head on all the time. But can we say to fight against the climate change, both of the countries, they need to sit together and they need to devise a plan for the future, how to cope with these kind of problems?
And by the way, if you're going to talk about, if you're going to answer in positive terms, let me also ask you, can that optimism be extended to Siachen, where we seem to be actually trying to melt the glacier that is there?
Yes, no, thank you so much. Both excellent questions. And I know, and as you may know, I've spent a lot of time in my own research looking at South Asian regional environmental cooperation. And with reference to air quality, we have the South Asian Cooperative Environmental Program, SASEP, which is a very well-established institution that goes back over 3 decades. It's headquartered in Colombo, Sri Lanka. It was aimed at specifically these kinds of issues where you have transboundary pollution. And that's what we need to revitalize organizations like SASAP, which are there specifically for this role. We had under SARC also. SARC, unfortunately, has become much more impotent, but it has also got an environmental mandate. And at one point, there was the Male Declaration that was signed around cooperation on air quality. Um, but unfortunately, these things are considered low politics. And until there is some leadership shown by either the top brass in India or in Pakistan, and by that I mean even the military establishments in both countries recognizing that this is something that is important for human security of both nations, and thereby galvanizing their governments to say you need to set up some kind of a regional environmental agreement around data sharing, best practice sharing, technology sharing to improve air quality, and to coordinate if there are going to be certain, like you can have a system where if you have meteorological monitoring, you can you can have a forecast for up to a week saying, look, there's going to be no airflow because you have a stagnant mass of air which is going to be stuck in the Punjab plains, and we should make sure we regulate farmers burning agricultural waste during that time. Tell them to hold off for another 2 weeks until there's going to be more airflow. That's the kind of coordination which can prevent these days where kids can't go to school. There will always be some impact with reference to the way our geography and meteorology is in winter times. There is going to be worse air quality in winter. This happens in many parts of the world. But we can still reduce some of these days where it's impossible to have proper economic activity and social activity. The other aspect is also transport sector. The pollution audit in Pakistan, which was done by FAO, also showed that even though agricultural wastes are a significant component, transport is the largest component for the air quality problems in Lahore. Same is true of Delhi. So for that, we need to have behavioral changes. We need to make sure there is greater access to public transport. People start using public transport more. And that requires a shift culturally. When I go to Lahore, I have no problem using the Orange Line, but I know a lot of people in my socioeconomic stratum don't want to use the Orange Line. I find it much better to go to Shalimar Gardens from, Raiwind on the Orange Line, but people don't. That requires a cultural shift. So people feel that this is cool, it's okay. We have to educate our kids to feel that. So I think it's important to have a systems-wide approach to dealing with these kinds of issues of air and other environmental quality concerns.
Right. And Dr. Saleem, you talked about the cultural shift, and while I understand that is very, very important, but that is a difficult thing to accomplish as well, and perhaps a slow change as well. And I want your take on when we take a look at Pakistan and the kind of issues, especially economically, that the people of the country have been facing with, when we talk about what we're dealing with the IMF and other factors. How will then these issues or this cultural shift in particular be prioritized when we have so many other urgent worries that the people are facing? How do we bring them to also understand this as an issue which is immediate and urgent?
Yes, I mean, I think the urgency has to come, as I said, convergently from both sides. You need the grassroots education and you need the government making it a priority, including our military as well, who have also a lot of access to, different resources in terms of, I have even said the military should have the green helmets program where, some of these people, we employ so many people who can be actually helping and promoting environmental education efforts. I also propose that, I think Pillai Sahib had asked about Siachen. And one of the things I had proposed earlier in some of my writings is that both India and Pakistan could resolve the Siachen conflict by making it, but not even by having necessarily some kind of decision on who has legal control over the glacier, but just saying, look, this is such an important area for environmental conservation that we will work, both armed forces will clean up that area, and we will work to make sure there is safe access for mountaineers and others who want to go there, as well as researchers who want to study glaciers. And this is not something out of the ordinary. In Antarctica, which is a similar environment in terms of the temperature, countries during the height of the Cold War had an agreement where even the Soviet Union and the United States, they got together and said, this is so important for science that we're going to have a treaty over it. So this is just a small sliver of land, and they could have that. It's just a matter of leadership. And in fact, there have even been plans prepared for a Siachen transboundary conservation area between the two militaries, which go back to the early 2000s when there were Sandia National Labs in the US. They hosted a Pakistani and Indian military officials who came together and said, this is a possibility for a cooperative monitoring agreement for Siachen. So I think there is so much opportunity, and it's practical. It's not impractical. These are win-win outcomes. It just requires leadership.
Right. Dr. Saab, I'm sorry, given that you were talking about plans of both militaries to actually address the climate challenges at Siachen, one concern that I remember, especially because Manmohan Singh was really ready to pull out of Siachen and to, demilitarize the zone. But if you remember at that time, what is intriguing is it was Indian Army which vetoed it by going directly to
Yes,
the protest. And
you're
that is
right.
one concern that I don't actually reconcile. I cannot reconcile with what you were saying. But on the other side,
No,
earlier,
that was
yeah,
maybe to clarify, that was something that even the Indian Foreign Secretary noted in his memoirs, that this happened, that the Indian military did not allow for the agreement to actually be done. But but that's a matter of, again, the leadership. They did have earlier brigadiers. There was Brigadier Gurmeet Kanwal and Brigadier Asad Hakim from Pakistan. Both of them were invited in Sandia National Labs in New Mexico for 6 months. They worked together on cooperative monitoring arrangement for the Siachen. And even the report you can see online. So that was done, but then the top brass and the leadership were not willing to implement it when it came to pass. And I think in that regard, India has to share the blame. In fact, in that way, there was greater initiative from Pakistan to resolve the agreement.
right.
Right.
And
I
regarding something,
unfortunately beg leave because I have another meeting. I had told the producers, but I always enjoy our conversations, and I hope we get more opportunities.
Absolutely. Thank you
thank
very
you.
much for
Thank you.
taking the time out, Dr. Saleem,
Thank
and being
you.
a part of
All
the show.
right.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Right. Faisal, I'll come to you. I know you had a question for Dr. Saleem as well, but let me
And
come
you
to
can
you.
answer that
And you
also.
can answer that also. But let us come to you with reference to when we talk about who's responsible and where we're putting our efforts in. We talked about countries, we talked about the US, but there's also, of course, big corporations and industries that are contributing to the emissions that are, of course, causing these issues in general. And they are not only companies that are contributing a lot, they're also companies that have a huge stronghold on the economy and the capital that flows internationally, and, of course, how the different countries are also involved. So, how do we actually target those companies that seemingly are making efforts towards climate initiatives, but most of those efforts are being dealt with on a much surface level rather than dealing with the root cause that they're actually contributing towards?
Excellent question, and of course, it's not only the big companies. I would simply say that automobiles companies, and then when it comes to oil and gas sector, especially oil and diesels, of course, they have a lot to do with the environment as well. So they don't want to shift completely I mean, and suddenly towards there, because they would be losing a lot out of it. And of course, they have been spending on this in recent decades. They have been coming up with solutions to it, that the less emissions, our engines are based on the less emissions, so it would be more environment friendly, and it would be having lesser emissions. So eventually it would of course have a good impact on the climate. But overall, Sana, when we know that in the world, of course, technology is so advanced that now, I mean, electric motorbikes, electric cars, you name it, electric buses, everything is there. But what is the biggest hurdle? Of course, tech transfer, that would never take place in a huge magnitude, so that can affect in a country like Pakistan, where we have more than 250 million of population. And in that, of course, we have to have the tech transfer, so that the industry itself can grow in Pakistan, and it can produce enough to cope with the requirements of the country. Or there are masses out there who can't afford to buy a new one and discard the previous one. But there are mechanisms in the world that are actually simply replacing that mode of engine that actually utilizes gasoline or utilizes diesel, and they can simply change it with put it on the hybrid models, or put it on the solar panels or anything like that. There is possibility, and that tech can be transferred to Pakistan. But of course, it would be a huge setback for the big giants industries. I'm talking about the automobiles, and then motorbike makers, and when it comes to oil and gas sector, of course it will be a huge setback for them as well. And overall, Sana, if we even take the example of the governments as well, governments, they rely on the taxes, and when it comes to taxes, of course, they tax all of these sectors, and that tax, generation of that tax, it actually helps run the governmental affairs as well. So overall, looking at every aspect of it, not only the giants, the corporate sector, but at the same time, to some extent, of course, the government itself, it is an easier model for the governments to, of course, keep on collecting the same tax from that sector, and then running its affairs. But to me, I think these are very bitter pills for a certain time period. A country like Pakistan has to take, and once that phase is covered, then of course they can find many other ways to find tax and run the affairs. And I think the kind of money which we spend on the disasters, or managing the disasters, or managing our other losses in terms of the water we lose every year, I think the amount of money that we spent there, it would be a lot more than the taxes we generate from these kind of corporate sectors and all. So to me, I think there is a lack of planning, and there is a sort of a trust deficit as well, when it comes to, like, if we switch to that side, a more climate resilient side, then it might be a factor of losing more taxes. So I think somebody just need to sit and plan well.
Right. And Farrukh, I want your take on that, because when we talk about somebody, of course, that has to be one of us in our institutions or the infrastructures that we have. But I don't understand in terms of who's actually going to do it, because we have those entities technically responsible for these actions. Yeah. But they need a lot of discussions in and around each other as well, with reference to what we're doing, particularly when we talk about our economic needs, whether this is factored in or not. And so what can we do in terms of taking these measures internally, and how much of that will be effective given what we have seen in the past, and how we have seen that despite the disasters that have unfortunately come in terms of the floods or the droughts or other disasters in the country, it seems that every time the next one happens, we're still not prepared.
Right, Sana. And something about bitter pills. Earlier it was mentioned. So let me tell you, I was a Yale little lad, right? I started hearing that Pakistan is going through some very critical phase and will have to take bitter pills. I continue to actually believe that. Then I grew up, and when one is young, one has these fancy ideas that perhaps one generation has to sacrifice, and maybe our generation is going to be the one that is going to sacrifice, but the rest will be okay. Now another generation, then another generation has come. We are talking about generation Z now and generation Alpha. And yet what is happening, Sana, is that we still are talking about the same thing. So what does it tell you? Our lack of focus, because we seem to be flitting between crises. One crisis, we wake up, we try to do whatever is necessary, then we go back to sleep, and then another crisis actually wakes us up. Why would that be? That would essentially be because of the bureaucratic structure that was left behind by the colonial regime, and we haven't been able to reform it per se, right? Even now, Sana, every year when there is a fiscal policy is about to be announced, what happens is that a lot of disbursements are either released immediately by the locals, because otherwise local administration, because if you don't do, next year there is going to be cut on those resources. Otherwise, a lot of money is relapsed, because your bureaucracy doesn't seem to have the capacity at grassroots level to focus on development, while it keeps on focusing on power politics and then policing, which are very strong, but other things perhaps not. Earlier, when Dr. Saleem was actually talking about our response to climate change, one thing that he mentioned was insurance, and how we need insurance, strong insurance in the country. So it was, luckily, yesterday I was sitting with one of the CEOs of agricultural focused company, one of the largest, and he was talking about their ability to offer insurance as well to people. And all of a sudden the question came to my mind, is it regarding crop insurance or something else? And then I learned that they are helping people to get life insurance, right? And why would that be? Then he also clarified that they have actually focused on or negotiated some kind of arrangement for agricultural input insurance, right? But then what happened was that today, when I, during day I called up a couple of banks, and I asked them, why is it that you are so reluctant to offer insurance policies, insurance to crops? And they say, because nothing is for certain and we cannot risk that much. So the government will have to sit with all these banks, because no matter what happens, Sana, everything might be losing money in this country. I haven't heard a single bank that loses money in this country. Never. Even in COVID times, remember the kind of scandals we heard? So many billions came, and what happened? Where did they go? So the concern right now is that when you are talking about policy, you must have a comprehensive picture. And regarding IMF, because we started by mentioning that, I am glad that we have actually reached an agreement, staff level agreement on both these things. But the fact is that while they have done what they needed to do, we have to do our part, and we have to actually decide for once that our next generation is not going to make the similar kind of sacrifices that we were asked to, and despite those sacrifices, nothing became of that.
Right, absolutely. Thank you very much, Farrukh, and thank you, Faisal, for joining us in the debate as always. And of course, this is a very, very important issue for Pakistan, and we really hope that we can make the right steps forward. For now, of course, the news coming in from the IMF as part of their rehabilitation and sustainability facility is good news, but there's a lot that needs to be done at home to making sure that we actually utilize its benefits and make that change. That's all that we have from the debate. We'll now see you tomorrow.